Before this story starts, if you've ever stood on a piece of land that everyone else had given up on and felt something in your chest that said not yet, subscribe right now and hit the bell. Because what happens to this Tennessee soil over the next 26 minutes is going to make you believe in bad soil again. Don't miss a single video. I had 18 acres of the most exhausted soil in Blount County, Tennessee. My father-in-law, a man who had farmed his whole life, walked it with me on the first day and said, "Son, this ground is tired. It's been farmed hard and put away wrong for 40 years. It's going to take more than a plan to fix this." He was right about the 40 years. He was wrong about the plan. Stay with me, because what the soil test revealed about this land in week 1 is something that would have made most people drive away and never come back. I'm glad I didn't. Blount County sits in the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains in eastern Tennessee, where the land rolls in the particular way of the Appalachian Piedmont, not flat, not steep, but a continuous series of gentle rises and falls that give every field a slightly different character, depending on which direction it faces and how the water moves through it after rain. The morning fog that fills the valleys between the ridges in every season gives the landscape a quality that painters have been trying to capture for 2 centuries without quite getting it right. There is something about the light in the Tennessee foothills that exists nowhere else. My 18 acres had that light. It also had 40 years of continuous tobacco and row crop production without meaningful organic matter return. Soil compaction from heavy equipment running the same track season after season, a pH that had drifted into the acidic range from decades of ammonium-based synthetic fertilizer applications, and a biological community that had been so thoroughly disrupted by herbicide and pesticide regimes that the earthworm population, which I counted in my first soil assessment, was essentially zero. Zero earthworms in Tennessee Piedmont soil is not a natural condition. The native soil of the Appalachian foothills, under its original forest cover, was biologically rich. The leaf fall from the mixed hardwood forest and the activity of countless soil organisms had built deep, dark, productive earth over thousands of years. What 40 years of industrial agriculture had done to that inheritance was visible in the color of the soil, pale, orange-red, stripped of the dark organic matter that should have been there, compacted into a surface that shed water rather than absorbing it. The farm had a history I could read in its landscape. The old tobacco barn in the northwest corner, weathered gray boards, sagging roofline, the particular smell of decades of cured leaf still present when you opened the door, told me what this land had been asked to produce. The deep wheel ruts running parallel to the old row lines told me how it had been worked. The gully erosion in the lower southeastern corner, where runoff from the upper field had concentrated and cut into the soil for decades unchecked, told me what had been lost. But there was something else. In the fence rows, those narrow strips of land along the old field boundaries where no equipment had run and no herbicide had been applied, native vegetation had maintained itself. Wild blackberries, ironweed, goldenrod, and beneath them, dark and alive, soil that had not been touched by the machinery, soil that still had biology, soil that still had depth. The fence rows were the land's memory of what it had been, and they told me that what it had been was still possible. The plan I'm about to describe is one that my father-in-law said would never work in Tennessee clay. 3 years later, he asked me to write it down for him. A plan for bad soil has to begin with an honest diagnosis, not an optimistic one, not a pessimistic one, an honest one. What is actually wrong, specifically, and what does each specific problem require? The soil test told the story in numbers. pH of 5. 4. Acidic, which locks up phosphorus and other nutrients, and creates conditions hostile to most vegetable crops. Organic matter at 0.8%, severely depleted. Compaction layer at 7 inches, the classic plow pan from decades of tillage at the same depth. Biological activity, negligible. Phosphorus, low. Potassium, low. calcium and magnesium, low and imbalanced. Every single number was wrong. And every single number had a specific correction. pH, agricultural limestone, applied at the rate the soil test recommended. BROADCAC across the full field and incorporated. Lime takes time to work in clay soil, months, not weeks. The correction would happen over the first full year of the restoration program. Organic matter, cover crops, compost, and time. There is no shortcut for organic matter building in clay soil. You add organic material, the soil biology processes it, and the organic matter reading goes up slowly, consistently, year by year. I budgeted 3 years to get from 0.8% to above 3%. Compaction. A single deep tillage pass with a subsoiler to shatter the plow pan, followed by a permanent no-till approach. Break the hard pan once, then never recreate it. Biological activity. Cover crops that feed the soil food web. Compost that introduces biology, and the cessation of all synthetic pesticide applications. Given the right conditions, soil biology recovers faster than most people expect. Within one growing season of the right management, earthworm populations begin to re-establish. The plan was not complicated. It was not clever. It was just the specific response to the specific diagnosis, the thing that most people who fail at soil restoration skip, because they apply general solutions to specific problems and wonder why nothing works. My father-in-law read the plan and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That's a lot of lime." "Yes, sir," I said. "And cover crops where you could be growing cash crops." "In year 1, I said. Year 2 and 3 we're planting." He looked at the plan again. "You've thought about this," he said. "Yes, sir," I said. He handed it back without further comment, but he kept a copy. What I did in year 1 on this Tennessee farm is the thing that almost nobody does, and it's exactly why almost nobody succeeds at soil restoration. This part is the whole secret. Year 1 on this farm was not a farming year. It was a building year. I applied 4 tons of agricultural limestone per acre across the full 18 acres, a significant investment in a correction that would not show its full effect for 12 months. The lime went on in early spring, broadcast by a local agricultural lime spreading service whose driver had been liming fields in Blount County for 30 years and had opinions about the right application, rate for Tennessee clay that I found both useful and entertaining. The subsoiler ran 1 pass across the main production areas in early spring, a single shank implement running at 14 inches depth, shattering the plow pan without inverting the soil. The first pass revealed something I hadn't expected. Below the compacted 7-inch plow pan layer, the soil was noticeably darker. The organic matter that should have been at the surface had been buried by decades of tillage and was sitting, compressed and anaerobic, below the compaction zone. Opening that layer to air and biology was like turning on a light in a dark room. Cover crops went in immediately after the subsoiling, a multi-species mix designed to address every specific deficiency the soil test had revealed. Crimson clover and hairy vetch for nitrogen fixation. Tillage radish, a variety with a thick taproot that penetrates the residual compaction, and, when it winter kills, leaves open channels in the soil for future roots to follow. Winter rye for biomass production and surface soil protection. And buckwheat in the areas where I wanted to accelerate the phosphorus availability. Buckwheat releases organic acids from its roots that solubilize bound phosphorus in acid soils, making it available to subsequent crops. This cover crop cocktail was not random. Every species was there for a specific reason, connected to the specific diagnosis from the soil test. This is what a plan looks like when it's actually a plan. The first cover crops germinated within 10 days. By the end of month 1, the bare orange-red compacted soil was covered in green. Not crop green, building green. Not yet harvest green, but alive in a way it hadn't been in 40 years. My father-in-law drove by in June and stopped at the gate. He looked at the cover crops for a long time. "You're not growing anything," he said. "I'm growing soil," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "That's an expensive way to grow dirt," he said. "It's an investment," I said. He drove away. But he slowed as he passed the cover crop field. I could tell he was looking at how green it was. The barn I'm about to describe almost didn't get built, and the reason it almost didn't is a story about the moment this whole project nearly ended before it really started. Every farm needs bones. Fencing, water, storage, workspace. Infrastructure that makes production possible and that holds its value as the farm develops. On 18 acres of exhausted Tennessee clay, the infrastructure investment had to be planned as carefully as the soil work, because money spent on the wrong infrastructure at the wrong time is money that can't be spent on the soil. The old tobacco barn was structurally sound, the gray weathered boards hiding a timber frame that Tennessee craftsmen had built to last and had. I had it inspected by a local contractor who had restored historic farm structures across Blount County, and his assessment was that the frame would stand for another century with the right repairs. The roof needed new metal. Several boards needed replacement. The foundation needed pointing. I did the work myself over 3 weekends in late spring, with help from a neighbor named Walt, who had grown up farming and who showed up the first Saturday with a truck full of tools and no explanation. Just the particular Tennessee generosity of someone who sees work being done and wants to help do it. The barn became the farm's headquarters, processing area, tool storage, a simple walk-in cooler I built into the north end, and a covered outdoor workspace on the south side where I could wash and pack produce in the shade. The moment it almost didn't happen, in late April, a week before I had planned to start the barn repairs, I got the quote for the cover crop seed mix one had designed. It was significantly higher than I had budgeted. I sat in the cab of my truck in the farm supply parking lot for probably 20 minutes doing math. Cover crops or barn repairs. I couldn't do both that month. I chose cover crops. The barn repairs waited 6 weeks. 6 weeks of storing tools in my truck and working without a proper base of operations. 6 weeks of my father-in-law asking pointed questions about why the barn was still unrepaired. But the cover crops went in on time. And time, in soil restoration, is the one thing you cannot buy back once it's spent. The barn got repaired in June. The soil kept building while I worked on it. The variety I'm about to tell you about has been growing in Tennessee for over 150 years, and when I tasted the first one from this soil, I understood for the first time what a tomato is actually supposed to taste like. Tennessee has one of the richest heirloom crop traditions in the American South. The isolation of the Appalachian valleys preserved seed varieties that had been developed and selected over generations for the specific conditions of the region, the clay soils, the humid summers, the particular combination of heat and rainfall that characterizes the eastern Tennessee growing season. Many of these varieties disappeared from commercial agriculture generations ago, but survived in the seed-saving traditions of mountain farming families. I planted with that heritage in mind. Brandywine tomatoes, the legendary Pennsylvania heirloom that performs extraordinarily well in the Tennessee foothills climate. Large, irregular, deeply flavored fruit that the restaurant market will pay premium prices for. Brandywines are slow. They take longer to ripen than any commercial variety, but the flavor reward makes the wait worth every day. Tennessee Red Valencia onions, a heritage variety developed for the Tennessee climate that produces large, sweet, mild-flavored bulbs that store well and sell at farmers markets faster than almost any other vegetable. Onions are one of the best crops for restoring soil. Their shallow root systems don't require deep tilth. They tolerate the transition period soil conditions, and their market value is reliable. Cherokee purple tomatoes, another heritage variety with Tennessee roots. The deep burgundy red fruit with complex, rich flavor that has made it a favorite of chefs and serious home gardeners across the country. Growing Cherokee purple in Tennessee clay soil that has been properly restored is one of the most satisfying things I have done on this farm. Bloody Butcher corn, a beautiful deep red heirloom, corn variety developed in Virginia and adopted across the Appalachian region. Not a commercial corn crop, but a specialty grain product, ground into cornmeal and sold directly to customers and small mills at prices far above commodity corn. And sorghum, the traditional sweetener crop of the Tennessee Hill Country, pressed and cooked into sorghum molasses in the fall in a tradition that connects directly to the agricultural heritage of this specific region. I planted a small sorghum section, not for commercial scale production, but for the market story it tells. This farm is connected to where it is and to what has always been grown here. The morning I transplanted the first Brandywine tomatoes into this Tennessee soil, after a full year of building that soil, is a morning I will remember for the rest of my life. Stay with me, because what I found when I dug the first transplant hole tells you everything about whether the plan had worked. Spring of year 2. The soil test results had come back from the University of Tennessee Extension Lab, and they were genuinely better than I had expected. pH up to 6.1 from 5.4. Organic matter up to 1.4% from 0.8. Compaction layer absent. The subsoiling and the tillage radish, taproots had shattered it permanently. Earthworm count, 17 per cubic foot, up from essentially 0. 17 earthworms per cubic foot in 1 year. I had not added earthworms. I had just created conditions where the earthworms that had survived in the fence rows, in that protected strip of unfarmed land, could expand back into the field. The biology had been waiting at the edges. It just needed an invitation. When I dug the first transplant hole for the Brandywine tomatoes in May of year 2, I pushed the trowel into the soil and it went in with a resistance that was different from year 1. Not the grinding resistance of compacted clay. A firmer, more structured resistance. The resistance of soil that has particles bonded together by organic matter and fungal threads into aggregates that hold their shape but yield to pressure. The hole opened cleanly. The sides of the hole didn't collapse. The soil smelled like earth should smell. That deep, complex, fungal richness that indicates a living biological community. I set the Brandywine transplant into the hole and held it there for a moment before filling in around the roots. 18 months of work. This was what it was for. What happened to the tomatoes in July of year 2 almost ended the whole project. And the way I discovered it, at 5 in the morning, in the rain, is something I think about every time things start going right. The Brandywine tomatoes grew with the vigor that restored soil gives crops that haven't been grown in properly healthy ground. The plants were large, larger than the same variety grown in tired soil, and the foliage was the deep saturated green of plants that have access to the full mineral profile they need. By late June, they were setting fruit at a rate that I was calculating market returns on. Then July came. The particular combination of Tennessee summer heat and humidity, warm nights, hot days, air that feels like being inside a greenhouse, creates ideal conditions for fungal diseases in tomato crops. Septoria leaf spot and early blight, the two most common Tennessee tomato diseases, can move through a planting with alarming speed when conditions are right. I had known this. I had planted with adequate spacing for airflow. I had mulched to prevent soil splash. I had done everything the extension guidelines recommended. And at 5 in the morning on a July Tuesday, walking the rows in a warm drizzle with a headlamp, I found the first septoria spots on the lower leaves of the 3rd row. I lost sleep over it. Not because of the disease itself, septoria is manageable if caught early, but because of what it represented. This was year 2. The market connections I had been building depended on a Brandywine harvest in August. The cash flow I had planned for the farm's continued development depended on that harvest. I responded immediately, removing affected lower leaves, applying a copper-based organic fungicide, increasing the mulch layer, adjusting the irrigation timing to morning, only so foliage dried faster. I walked the rows every morning for the next 3 weeks. The disease slowed. Did not stop. Septoria never completely stops in a Tennessee July, but slowed enough that the upper canopy and the developing fruit were protected. The harvest came in, reduced from my projection, but real. My father-in-law walked the rows with me during the harvest. He looked at the brandywine fruit, large, irregular, the deep pink red of a properly ripe heirloom tomato. He picked one up, looked at it for a moment. "Brandywine?" he said. "Yes, sir." He was quiet. "My mother grew brandywines," he said, "in her kitchen garden." Before everything went to hybrids, he set the tomato down carefully. "You've got good tomatoes," he said. From my father-in-law, that sentence was a standing ovation. The phone call I got in September of year 2, from a chef in Knoxville, changed the entire financial trajectory of this farm. And it happened because of something I almost didn't do. Markets for farm products don't build themselves. They have to be worked as deliberately as the soil. Connection by connection, relationship by relationship, reputation built one delivery at a time. I had started at the Maryville Farmers Market in year 2 with a modest table. Whatever the farm was producing, brought in as beautifully presented as I could manage. The presentation mattered as much as the product, because at a farmer's market, the story of the farm is part of what people are buying. I could tell the story of this soil, the 40 years of exhaustion, the year of building, the deliberate restoration, and people responded to it. Not all people, but the right people. The chef call came in September. A restaurant in Knoxville, 45 minutes from the farm, had heard about the Cherokee purple tomatoes from a customer who had bought them at the Maryville market. The chef wanted to know if I could supply her restaurant directly. She wanted to know about the growing practices. She wanted to visit the farm. She came on a Tuesday morning in late September and walked every part of the property, the production beds, the cover crop rotation zones, the old tobacco barn, the composting system I had built in the northwest corner. She crouched in the main tomato bed and dug her fingers into the soil. "What did this soil look like when you started?" she asked. I showed her the before photos I had taken on day 1. The pale orange-red compacted surface. The 0 earthworm count written in my notebook. She looked at the photos and looked at the soil under her fingers. "You rebuilt this in 2 years?" she said. 2 years of building," I said. "Now we're farming." She put the Cherokee purple tomatoes on her fall menu. She told her customers where they came from and how the soil had been restored. 3 of those customers called me directly to ask about buying produce for their own households. The market was building itself, the way markets always build when the product is genuinely good and the story is genuinely true. The winter between year 2 and year 3 was the hardest period of the whole project, and not because of anything that happened on the farm. What happened in my father-in-law's kitchen that December changed everything. The dark season of this project was not a crop failure or a drought or a market collapse. It was quieter than that. In December between year 2 and year 3, my father-in-law was diagnosed with a health condition that would limit his mobility significantly. He was a man who had defined himself by physical work his whole life, by the ability to walk fields and fix fences and lift whatever needed lifting. The diagnosis took that from him in ways that were not immediately practical, but were deeply personal. I went to see him the week after the diagnosis. We sat in his kitchen, and he didn't say much for a while. Then he got up and went to a drawer and came back with a folded piece of paper. My original farm plan, the one I had shown him in year 1. He spread it on the table and looked at it. "I kept this," he said. "I know," I said. "I saw you take a copy." He was quiet for a moment. "I told your wife you were going to fail," he said. Not accusatorially, just honestly. "I know that too," I said. He looked at the plan. "The line worked," he said. "Yes, sir. The cover crops worked." "Yes, sir. The brandywines are good tomatoes." "They are." He folded the plan carefully. "I want to see it in spring," he said. When everything comes back, that conversation, the particular weight of it, the particular tenderness of a man who had spent his life skeptical of plans, finding himself wanting to see one succeed, carried me through the winter maintenance, through the cover crop planning for year 3, through every cold January morning when the motivation to get up and go to the farm was harder to find. I was going to show him the farm in spring. The soil test number I'm about to share with you is one that the University of Tennessee extension agent said she hadn't seen on a farm that started where this one started. Not in 15 years of testing fields across Blount County. Spring of year 3. The soil test results came back and I read them 3 times because I kept expecting to have misread something. pH 6.6, optimal for virtually every vegetable crop grown in Tennessee. Organic matter 3, 2%, more than quadruple the starting point in 3 years. Earthworm count 41 per cubic foot. Biological activity, the lab's designation was high, the highest category on their assessment scale. The extension agent who reviewed the results called me personally. "What are you doing to this soil?" she asked. I told her about the cover crop cocktail, the single subsoiling pass, the lime program, the compost additions, the cessation of all synthetic inputs. She was quiet for a moment. "That's not complicated," she said. "No, ma'am," I said. "Then why doesn't everyone do it?" "Because year 1 is hard," I said. "You're growing soil instead of crops. It takes patience." Another pause. "Would you be willing to speak at our spring field day?" She said. The farm that my father-in-law said was too tired to fix was being invited to teach other farmers how to fix tired farms. Year 3's production was the fullest the 18 acres had delivered. The Brandywine tomatoes, grown in soil with 3.2% organic matter and a full complement of soil biology, produced at a scale and quality that the Knoxville chef described as the best she had worked with from any local producer. The Cherokee purple tomatoes were fully contracted before planting. The Tennessee red Valencia onion sold out at every market appearance. The Bloody Butcher corn went to a small mill in Maryville that ground it into specialty cornmeal and sold it with the farm's name on the label. The sorghum was pressed in October by a neighbor who still had his grandfather's sorghum mill, a piece of agricultural heritage that still works and still matters in this corner of Tennessee. What my father-in-law said when he walked this farm in April of year 3 is something I am going to tell you right now, because it's the most important moment in this entire story. He came in April when the cover crops were at their peak before termination and the first spring plantings were going in. Walt drove him. His mobility limited enough now that he couldn't drive himself on unfamiliar ground. He walked slowly with a cane, but he walked every part of the farm I showed him. He stopped at the old tobacco barn and put his hand on the repaired gray boards. He looked at the cover crop field, the crimson clover in full red bloom, the rye green and tall, the hairy vetch running through everything. He pressed his hand into the main production bed soil, his farmer's hand reading the texture and structure and moisture and life in the way that only someone who has spent a lifetime touching soil can read it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "This is good ground." Not "this became good ground." Not "you fixed it." Not "I was wrong." This is good ground. Present tense. As if it had always been this way. As if the 40 years of exhaustion and the 0 earthworm count and the pale orange-red compaction had been a misunderstanding that had been cleared up. And this dark, alive, productive Tennessee clay was what the land had always been waiting to be called. I didn't say anything. He took his hand out of the soil and looked at it, the dark organic material on his palm, and nodded once. That nod contained everything. "I want to tell you something about bad soil that nobody told me when I started. Something that 3 years of working this Tennessee ground taught me that I couldn't have learned any other way. Bad soil is not a verdict. It's a description of a current condition. And current conditions change. The 18 acres of exhausted Tennessee clay that my father-in-law said was too tired to fix. It was tired. He was right about that. What he couldn't see, because nobody had shown him, was that tired is not the same as finished. That tired ground can rest and be fed and be given back what was taken from it and remember what it was capable of. 3.2% organic matter, 41 earthworms per cubic foot, pH of 6.6. Brandywine tomatoes that a Knoxville chef calls the best she's worked with. Cherokee purple tomatoes contracted before planting. Tennessee heirloom corn going to a local mill. Sorghum pressed on a neighbor's grandfather's equipment in October. My father-in-law's hand in the soil saying, "This is good ground." I started with nothing but bad soil and a plan. The plan said, diagnose specifically, correct specifically, build before planting, be patient, the soil will respond. The soil responded. Look at this farm now. If you just watch this Tennessee farm go from 0 earthworms and exhausted orange clay to 3.2% organic matter and brandywines that chefs drive across the county for, then you already know that this channel is where you need to be. Every week, a new farm. A new piece of land that everyone else gave up on. A new set of specific problems and specific solutions and specific results. Subscribe right now. Hit the bell. And leave a comment telling me, what's the worst soil you've ever tried to grow something in? I read every single comment. The next transformation is already being planned. Don't miss it.